when something becomes big and you have big players, and those big players have lobbying power, when they're paying the majority of your bills, and they also have power with the government, they can sway laws and they can change society's rules. And that causes a dilution of the organic principles, which we have to safeguard and promote. And we should fight for those.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label that distinguishes soil-grown crops and pasture-raised livestock. You just heard from Arran Stephens, co-founder and CEO of Nature's Path Foods. Since 1985, Arran has been one of the rare exceptions in the organic industry, fighting alongside farmers to protect the meaning of organic. Before we hear more from Arran, I'd like to ask you to please take a moment today to leave us a rating and review. It really does make a huge difference in our efforts to grow our movement. Now let's get back to the conversation between my co-director Dave Chapman and Arran Stephens of Nature's Path.
So Arran, welcome.
Thank you.
You came to the organic movement a long time ago, and I would love to hear just a little bit about what in the world brought you.
It's something I have to ask myself sometimes. It was in 1967, while I was traveling around India, I was wondering what I should do when I got back to Canada. And I spent 7 months there with my mentor. And I came back from India to Canada with $7 in my pocket. And but I had a dream, I had a vision, a little bit like the worm or the caterpillar that has a dream about becoming a butterfly one day. And that is what I call a vision. So I had this vision to open a vegetarian restaurant in Vancouver. And it was the first real vegetarian restaurant in Canada. It was all based on whole foods. And I had some earlier background with the Paradox restaurant in New York City in 1964, where I served as a waiter. It was America's and the world's first macrobiotic restaurant. It was founded on the principles of George Osawa and Michio Kushi. I opened the Golden Lotus restaurant in November of 1967, and the restaurant became wildly popular, and it led to further development. In 1969, I was back in India again, spent another 6 months there. The restaurant was rocking and rolling, and I got married. I had an arranged marriage to Ratna, my life partner, and we came back to Canada to get together, and together we built a family, we built a life, and out of that came Canada's first large natural food supermarket, Lifestream Natural Foods, in 1971, and I worked there building that company up until 1981, and then sold it. In 1985, Ratna and I started Nature's Path out of the back of our 120-seat vegetarian restaurant in Vancouver, based on the premise of creating good, healthy, tasty food, everything organic, and everything that Nature's Path has ever created and done since that time until now has been always organic. And we were the first company, or first cereal manufacturer in North America to achieve third-party organic certification. In those days, it was through Oregon Tilth, and then later on we got certified by another certifier. So since those early days, since 1971, I was one of the founding members of Organic Merchants. It was North America's first organic trade association. Organic Merchants, and the acronym for that, of course, was OM, very appropriately. And from Organic Merchants...
I think Paul Hawken was part of OM, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Paul
Yeah.
Hawken, Frank Ford from Arrowhead Mills, Mike Potter from Eden Foods, There was a company called Shadowfax and Llama, Toucan, and Crow, which later became United Naturals, and United Naturals eventually became UNFI. So
Mm.
I've been there through the whole history when the whole organic movement back in 1967 probably wasn't more than a couple of $1 million, if that. The only organic food company that I knew of at that time that was purely organic was Walnut Acres in Pennsylvania. And it was
Sure.
kind of based on the principles of J.I. Rodale and the Agricultural Testament guy.
Howard, yeah,
Albert
absolutely.
Howard, Sir Albert
Yeah.
Howard. Yeah. But my father was an organic farmer, but he didn't know it as organic. That was back in the 1950s. So my dad, he embraced chemicals, as all farmers did in those days after the war, the Second World War. But when I was helping my dad plant sweet corn on the farm by hand, 3 kernels of corn in a shovel hole every foot, and we covered a whole field in an afternoon. So he said, "Arrow boy, always leave the soil better than you found it." And that idea of leaving the soil better was part of the practices that he used on the farm by hauling up seaweed from the beaches at Souk, filling up the pickup truck with seaweed and laying it on the field, and using manure and using green cover crops and a lot of mulch. He really believed in mulching his fields, and he created an earthworm paradise. And he wrote a little booklet in 1951 called "Sawdust is My Slave." And he said, which seems to be a very inappropriate thing, he said, "I never had a slave before," because he's referring to the mulch, "except my wife." He said, "but then I was her devoted slave too." So having sawdust as my slave was something new. So I think those principles of leaving the soil better, always leaving the soil better, always leaving the earth better, that became the founding vision of Nature's Path Foods, which was started in 1985 out of the back of our restaurant. So
Amazingly, you've quoted from your father's booklet about rejecting hydroponic production way back then.
yes, it wasn't known as hydroponics then. It was just known as an aqueous solution or an inert substance like sand, and adding a chemical solution to it to grow crops. He said, I would never eat this, nor would I ever serve it to my family.
Yeah.
He was very, very adamant that food should be grown on living, fertile soil. I mean, just think about it. If you have an aqueous solution and an inert substance, a substrate, whether it's coconut fiber, or if it's sand, and you add 5 or 6 or 7 or maybe 10 different nutrients to it, and you can grow crops out of that. But if a single handful of fertile soil contains billions of microorganisms, including earthworms, of course, which are visible, and all the things that are invisible in the teeming life of the soil, how can a few chemicals in water, in an inert substrate, how can that produce really healthy living food?
Yeah. Yeah. So you had, I think, a pretty unusual background as a young man to grow up on a farm where you were being taught lessons like that.
I'm very grateful.
Yeah, I know you went to LA and traveled around quite a bit, and I'm curious how you made the transition from art to food, and what that was. Why was that? How did that happen?
Well, I'm just thinking now, why not? Why not go from art to food, and from food back to art again? In fact, this is one of my paintings back here. Can't see it too well. But, when I came back from India in '67 and I didn't have any money, just had this passionate dream to make the world better and to serve the community. It wasn't to make money. The overriding emphasis or principle or passion behind the business that I started was to serve the community. So I feel that if you put service first, and your idealism into your work, and apply lots of perspiration to your inspiration, then there's a good chance that it will be successful. So I came to an abrupt end to my life as an artist. I had 3 exhibitions before I started Nature's Path, before I started the restaurant. Major exhibitions of my art in San Francisco, New York City, and in Vancouver. But it really didn't put food on the table. And because I had that background with a macrobiotic restaurant in New York City in 1964, serving the likes of Timothy Leary and other people from the counterculture that was emerging, I felt that I wanted to create really healthy food, because I felt that could really change and improve the health of people. And if it improves the life of people, it's going to help improve the life of society. And I had this aspiration that someday organic food will become the norm, because it made such sense to me that organic food means that you're growing without cancer-causing chemicals. You're growing without chemical fertilizers, which are derived from fossil fuels. All of those chemicals leach into the waterways, they go into the soil, they go into the atmosphere, and diminishing the quality of life. And I said, well, I want to pour my passion, I want to pour my artistic talents or whatever into creating this kind of idealistic business. And so, when Nature's Path got birthed out of the back of our restaurant in 1985, I used some of my art, to influence the type of packaging and messaging that we would have. And, believe me, I made every mistake in the book, because I never went to business school. I never even graduated from high school. I never stopped learning, though. As Mark Twain said, I never let my education get in the way of my learning. And it's interesting that we were actually, my wife and I were supposed to receive honorary doctorate degrees from the University of Victoria in June. But because of COVID, that's all been postponed until this pandemic subsides to some extent. And God, I hope it does soon. So it's been an interesting journey, lots of ups and downs, and times when I came close to going out of business. It's when the sharks were circling. I didn't know many of the business principles. I didn't know about cash flow. Even if you're profitable and you're growing at an accelerated rate, if you don't have capital, you'll be out of business, because even if you're profitable, you won't be able to catch up with the cash that's constantly being required to fuel growth. So we grew kind of organically on a 100% organic basis. Our products are always organic, and but the growth, we didn't get outside investors. We used the banks, we used debt financing, and we didn't take on venture capital, which I see as a two-edged sword, in today's world. Because venture capital wants to get in, they want to get in early, they eventually want to take over everything, and within 5 years, they want an exit strategy. So if you're a long-term thinker, as I've always been, I wanted to build something for the long haul that would last. I wanted to be there when organics became the norm in society. So we built our business slowly, and we invested and reinvested all of the operating profits of the company back into the business. And eventually we grew, and although we came close to failure many times, we somehow survived, and we became debt-free, and we were able to do things that many other companies are not able to do. We're able to speak our minds, for example. And we've tackled all kinds of really difficult subjects. People say, well, what are you? Are you an activist or are you a businessman? And I said, well, I think I'm both. you know. I'd rather be an activist than a dormantist, you know.
All right. So I want to go there. But first, I want you to help people to understand, to feel, the world keeps changing. And right now, people take organic so for granted as, yes, 53, $55 billion, and it's going to keep growing. And it's wonderful that it's going to keep growing. But to go back to that time, which was a time of tremendous social upheaval, and there was this new thing that was just growing really for the first time in America, which was an alternative to something else that was just growing at that time, which was the conventional chemical agricultural industry, or the big ag.
Yeah.
And really, as it's like the military agricultural complex. I mean, or the agricultural industrial complex.
A war on nature.
A war on nature, exactly. And so this organic was created as an alternative to that. And I think it's a perfect example that you came into this not as a business person and with no training in business. So I think you were with a lot of other people with no business training also. Tell me, what was it like in the beginning when Ohm first existed, and Afpana, and then the very early beginning of the Organic Trade Association? What was it like?
It was a time of giddy growth. We were doubling every year, it seemed like. The whole the idealism and the altruism and the faith that people had in organic farming and organic food and eating naturally and close to the earth, and wanting, the desire for a lot of young people to escape the uncertainties of the Vietnam War, and an older generation that was very stuck in the status quo. It was a heady time. It was an exhilarating time, and although some people fell by the wayside, it reminds me of this Persian parable of the conference of the birds, where thousands of birds set off on the journey to meet the king of all birds, and by the end there were only 30 birds make it, after years of struggle. So it's kind of like that in a way. Many started out on this journey, and many fell by the wayside, and some persevered. And I say, a success is a failure that never gave up. We came close to failing on a number of occasions, due to our own success and lack of know-how. But maybe that was also a benefit too, because fools rush in where angels fear to tread. We were able to achieve things maybe that if we had all the rigid formal training, we would have never had the guts to actually go and do these things that we were doing. Paul Hawken, and I think he's one of your speakers.
Yeah.
I first met Paul, I think it was in 1973 or 74, when he was managing Erewhon Natural Foods in Boston. Not the Erewhon of today, but this was the exciting Erewhon that had
I
retail
remember
stores
the
and
exciting Erewhon.
Yeah.
I lived in Boston. I went and got my food there. I remember it.
Did you ever meet any of the old macrobiotic people?
Well, as I recall, they bought Erewhon. When Paul left, it was taken over by the macrobiotic people, I believe.
Yeah, and then they sold it to a venture capital company.
Mm.
Yeah. Many a great brand and a great company have kind of bit the dust after they were acquired. It's like I said, it's a two-edged sword. I knew that competition would eventually come in full force once organic foods became more mainstream. And as I said, I wanted to be there when that happened. So that meant building a very strong, solid base, not selling out your principles, and fighting the good fight, um, tackling the giants, tackling Monsanto, tackling corporate America, as it were, in a way, because we were fighting up against formidable foes who had way more money. And the organic movement has always been like that. It's always been like a little bunch of Davids, fighting these huge Goliaths. We were
Yeah.
we were kind of, kind of dancing with the elephants, right? But we were like little mice running under the feet of the elephant. So you had to be really careful not to either get stepped on or shat upon, because you'd get buried, right, or flattened.
Yeah. So in those early days, it must have been so exciting when people like you started to create companies that wanted to buy crops from organic farmers. I know
Yes.
when I started, there was no market.
Yeah.
There was no label. The name was unknown. We were doing it just because we believed in it. But I think in those early days of OHM and AFPANA and of the Organic Trade Association, farmers were excited that there was somebody who actually wanted to buy what they were growing.
Yes. Well, we knew a couple of organic farmers. There was Alvin Sharesky out in Saskatchewan that was growing all kinds of organic grains. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, and he was very, very strict about, how food should be grown. And old Alvin, and there's another guy that was like him, lived into their 90s, farming out there and supplying wonderful organic millet and rye and triticale and wheat and all the different grains that you could grow in Saskatchewan. And then we were buying rice by the truckload from California, Northern California, Lundberg rice. It was a while before Lundberg really transitioned to real organic. And a lot of their stuff is not organic, but we would buy their organic rice, and that became the basis of a lot of things. So today, we deal with several hundred growers, or maybe more than that, representing over 150,000 acres of organic crops that provide the ingredients that go into Nature's Path and CAFOs products. CAFOs is a company we acquired about 5 years ago. They made organic tortilla chips, the best, I think, on the market because they weren't made from cornmeal. They were made from whole corn. So we have this network of suppliers, and we also have our own farm too, where we have about 5,000 acres. About 2,500 acres of that is in production, and the rest of it's basically in forest and bush and lakes and things like that.
Yes, well, I know your farm well because it's certified with the Real Organic Project.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful farm that
Yes.
Linley went up and visited with Dag, and it's
Stuart.
really and Stuart, and it's a great model. And I want to come to that, but first, so as that market developed, and there's this funny thing that's hard to sort out, but as you started to buy more and more farmers grew up and you started to sell and the market started to recognize that, and there's this virtuous cycle, and I think there comes a point where the cycle isn't necessarily virtuous, and it's a wonderful thing that the market explodes because people realize that they want an alternative to chemical agriculture. That is something that we have to so celebrate, but something does happen in there,
Yes,
which is that
you're very, very
the market,
true.
it becomes filled with people who actually don't share your belief system.
Mhm.
They just see an economic opportunity.
Yes, there's real organic, and then there's organic by default. When the Real Organic Association began, we wholeheartedly endorsed it because we have seen a dilution of organic principles. It started happening in the Organic Trade Association a few years ago. Actually, I was there at the Organic Trade Association. I was head of their ethics committee, and I was fortunate to be there during the development of the USDA organic seal. and all of the rules that went into that. And those rules were very wholesome and good. And of course, there were always improvements to be made along the way. But we saw that players got involved in the OTA that were not as idealistic, I would say, as many of the founders of the organic movement. And that's where I had a difficulty. I really respect the OTA for what it has achieved. It's done wonderful things. But when something becomes big and you have big players, and those big players have lobbying power, when they're paying the majority of your bills, and they also have power with the government, they can sway laws and they can change society's rules. And that causes a dilution of the organic principles, which we have to safeguard and promote. And we should fight for those. And the Real Organic Association and also the Organic Farmers Association, I think, are doing wonderful jobs of protecting the real organic brand. To allow hydroponics into organics is a travesty. It should never have happened. To allow CAFOs in organic animal raising is again a travesty of the original organic principles. And those principles were in writing in AFPANA, and they were also in writing in the beginning of the OTA. How those things got corrupted, well, you can just see who are the major players in that association today.
And you were a founding board member of the Organic Trade Association, were you not?
No, I was a founding member of Organic Merchants, which birthed AFPANA, which birthed the Organic Trade Association. I came to the Organic Trade Association. I joined the board in the 1990s, and I was there up until the launching of the USDA organic seal. And after that, I had some difficulties with a certain board member or two because I kept saying that the biggest threat to organics is going to be GMOs. And they kept sweeping it under the rug. And I was calling for, I said, sooner or later, we're going to have to start testing. And they said, no, it's not about testing. It's about a system. I said, it's GMOs are going to contaminate the organic crops, because they travel. The GMOs will, they travel in the pollen, and stuff spills out of trucks, and things are mingled in mills, and all these different problems that we're going to face down the road. And people just kept on shoving it under the rug. One of the board members was the founder of the Happy Planet group of companies, Cascadian Farms and what have you. And and the way he was talking, and I said, we've got to do something about GMOs. We got to take some kind of stand. What is our strategy here? And they kept getting swept under the rug. And I said to my friend Ken McCormick, who is an old organic pioneer, and he's now on the he heads up iFoam right now here in the U.S. So Ken was our marketing department of one for several years at Nature's Path. And I said to Ken, it sounds like he sounds like he's going to be selling his company, Cascadian Farms, Happy Planet, and all that. It's Muir-Glen, Happy Planet. And sure enough, there was an announcement that day at the convention, the Natural Foods Expo in Anaheim, that that company was just bought by General Mills. So, and I said, well, that explains why he was trying to cover up the whole GMO problem. So after that, I decided to resign from the OTA. But I said, we should still have a presence there. And I asked Dag Falk if he would join the OTA. And he did, and he became an executive member. And then, when the Dark Act came along, was a real compromise of organic principles. And, it was strongly advocating for GMO labeling, clear GMO labeling. And then we saw how that whole thing got sold out. And then Dag decided to resign from the OTA. Because a decision was made by two people and the OTA to support the Dark Act without consulting DAG or other members of the OTA, of the board.
Yeah.
And DAG was an executive member of the board. And when DAG asked about it, he said, "Oh, well, you were flying on a plane that day."
Yeah.
I mean, it
yeah.
was really, really a terrible thing to happen to the organic movement. And ever since then, there's been a lot of defense about hydroponic farming, hydroponics in organics, and the protection of the big CAFO or so-called organic milk raising. So these two things have been probably some of the biggest problems that have weakened, I'd say, the integrity of organics.
I have become aware of the fact, it's quite striking to me, the companies that are privately held and which the people running the companies actually have belief systems that they run the companies based on. And other companies that are just publicly held corporations, and their only goal, legally defined, is to make a profit for their shareholders. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's and I like to talk about that, but one thing that I see is that so much of the organic brands are now owned by the major players who own the conventional brands. And I think when you see the chart of who owns what, it is astonishing, really.
It's like an octopus, with many arms, more than 8, of course. Yeah, that's true. And we've made a very bold statement even on our website. No part of Nature's Path is for sale. No part of Nature's Path is for sale. This is a family legacy company, and it's here for the long run. And back, it was a day a few years ago when I received a call at 10 o'clock from the head of Kellogg's saying they'd like to talk with me about an investment in our company. 2 hours later, I got a call from the legal department of what's the name of that company now? It's another company that I won't mention. And they said they were very interested in making an investment in Nature's Path. And 2 of the largest food companies, can you believe it, wanted to buy out Nature's Path within 2 hours of each other.
Yeah.
So we get something like an average of 40 to 50 offers a year to sell out. And we're just not interested. If they see future in Nature's Path, why shouldn't we see a future in it? And if we sell out, then we'll lose control of the company. We'll lose control of its destiny, and then it will not be what we set out to be.
Yeah, yeah. So when you left OTA, it was quite public, and you issued a very strong letter saying you were leaving because of their support for the Dark Act and because of their support for hydroponic being certified as organic. I know that there are many members of the Organic Trade Association who are friends and who are allies.
Me too.
That's right. That's right. So do you think that there's hope to bring the Organic Trade Association back into alignment with the organic movement?
I think there's always hope. We should never give up hope. We should never give up our efforts to make things better than they are. And yeah, I think there's hope. I think it might require a change of leadership at some point, unless the leadership changes themselves. If the change doesn't come from within, that's where it should come from, then it will be imposed, I believe. But hopefully it's not a change that's for the worse. It has to be a change for the better. It's not that these are bad people. They're good people, and they're doing good work. The OTA is still doing good work, but this watering down of the organic principles and allowing hydroponics and CAFOs, and organics, that has to be stopped.
Okay,
if they don't do it, somebody else will take over, right? Somebody else will, And Real Organic Project is something that we support. It's got a noble premise. I'm glad you, as an organic farmer, are spearheading this. You're doing great work. Keep it up.
Thank you. Thank you. So you were an early pioneer, I would say, of the anti-GMO movement. You've been very active, and you helped in the campaigns just to require labeling so that people could make their own decision. They knew what they were eating, which by and large they don't. And you lost that fight with the Dark Act. I think, was it after that you worked as part of the group to create the non-GMO label?
Yes. Yes, I was one of the founding people in the Non-GMO project. And I'll tell you why I left that organization, because they started accepting membership from very large chemical companies and others, and this whole butterfly seal became kind of greenwashing, and I think it was diluting the whole organic movement. But I do support what the Non-GMO Project does with the testing of products for presence of GMOs. And I think that's great. That was the best thing that it has achieved so far, in my mind. So we are members of the Non-GMO Project as well as the USDA Certified Organic Seal. And I think together they offer some higher level of credibility with the consumer in an increasingly cynical world. Because of the testing that we've done, we have caused some of our suppliers of corn, for example, to improve their practices to prevent contamination from GMOs, because we've had to reject a whole bunch of loads of corn just because it was above a threshold that was acceptable to us. Really, we shouldn't have to accept any threshold for GMO contamination, but it's in the atmosphere. It's up in the North Pole, like frozen in the polar ice, just like DDT is still frozen in the polar caps, which was DDT hasn't been around for about 50 years, but it's still present in the environment. So I don't know how long it's going to take, 20,000 years, as they say, to get rid of it totally. In the same way, GMOs are lurking in the background of the environment. So this is something that we have to keep on struggling to improve our practices, to never give up the struggle for a minute to come to a higher standard for organics and for ridding the world of GMOs. I know it seems like impossible to do now because the genie has gotten out of the bottle, right? How do you put these organisms back into the bottle, basically, because they're so widespread into the environment, and it's so widely used across the planet. But these things, although they're there, we still have to fight to keep them out of our food supply as much as we possibly can. And the only way to do that really is adopting organic principles, real organic principles, genuine, authentic organic practices that do not allow for GMOs to be used, or any of the chemical pesticides or herbicides or chemical fertilizers. But that's not enough. It has to be soil building. It has to be creating better farming practices. There are produce companies that go out there and they lease, several thousand acres. I'm talking about big so-called organic produce companies that lease thousands of acres of land down in California. Land that has not been organically grown or treated. I mean, it's commercial cropland. And after it goes through a period of 3 years of not having any pesticides on it, They'll farm that intensively without doing anything to improve the soil, deplete the soil, and then they'll go and lease another big plot of land and leave that one behind. That's what I call organic by default, and that's where organic farming is getting a bad rap, because they're doing it on a very large scale, but they're not doing anything really to improve the fertility of the soil, to improve the tilth. And that's where we're able to really draw down carbon from the atmosphere and fix it in the soil by real organic methods. And I think these types of operations need to be held to account.
Yeah, yeah. We see greenwashing, as you say, and we see it in almost any label that we come up with. Somebody with a lot of money is going to figure out how to make more money by making something that at least either they take it over or something that looks just like it.
Sure.
And you
Success
can look at
breeds imitation, right?
That's right. And you can see it, okay, with the National Organic Program, and there's a struggle. But I look at it with regenerative agriculture, where there is no national government involved in defining it. But the problem is that nobody owns the definition. So if any large multinational wants to say, well, we're regenerative, and I took a look the other day because I had a talk with a good friend who's a great advocate, and I almost couldn't find a large multinational involved in food production who didn't claim to be regenerative. I thought, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's another big bone I have to pick, and that's in the so-called regenerative agriculture movement. We saw at Expo West, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, an announcement that a particular company was turning 1 million acres into regenerative agriculture. And when I looked into it, it really wasn't doing much at all for the land, other than having animals come on the land and perhaps growing some cover crops. They were adopting some organic practices into this so-called regenerative agriculture system, but still allowing the use of chemical fertilizer, still allowing cancer-causing glyphosate to be used, and they call it no-till farming. No-till farming, it says, is more regenerative because you're not plowing the fields and you're not allowing, the evaporation of the moisture from the soil, and you're doing all these things, good things to the soil by spraying this Roundup on the soil, right? It's really easy. You have your at the front of your tractor, you're spraying the glyphosate, and the back you're seeding, right? So it's not plowing, right? But it is adding this dangerous chemical into the environment, into the food supply. And so I have a big objection to that. They're pretending that they're as good as organic, regenerative agriculture, but unless it's certified regenerative, it really is not going to be organic, and it's going to contain a lot of the things that we're trying to get away from in organic production. So that is what I call massive greenwashing on a massive scale.
I've told my friends in the regenerative movement they need a real regenerative movement too. So, Arran, towards the end here, let me just say Nature's Path is transitioning now to another generation, to your kids. That's wonderful. And at the same time, the velocity of change in our world, and that certainly includes our food system, is just taking off. And I can't believe how different agriculture, just basic agriculture, looks from 20 years ago. And so tell me, what are your thoughts about the challenges that your kids are going to face in the next 20 years as they shepherd Nature's Path?
Climate change and social change. These two things are inevitable. We can either harm our future or make our future by the choices that our generation and the next generation will make. And if we don't make those changes, we're in for big trouble. And I am an eternal optimist, and I want to see a livable world for my children and my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and for everybody's grandchildren. It's not just a selfish thing. I want it for everybody. I want to see a habitable world there. I don't want all the species to become extinct. I don't want to see the human race to become extinct by our folly. But we have to change what we're doing. And it's so wonderful to see people, young people like teenagers who are becoming activists and standing up for the environment and demanding change and demanding the leaders to change. We need to have a system where we put these young leaders into positions of power in the future. But there's also the power behind them. It's the power of the masses of millennials and Gen Xers and I don't know what you call the Zs and or the Zs. All these young people that are they're like this new garden that's emerging that will help, I think, correct the terrible course that humanity is on right now. So, that's kind of my prayer is that we will. Hopefully, I will see some of it in my lifetime because I'm not going to be. I'm 76. I'll be 77 in January. So I want to see that, before I pass on to the other world, and so I have hope. They will have monumental challenges to overcome. There will be challenges in supply. We're seeing areas of the planet that are not as productive food-wise as they once were because of drought and other challenges, and it's probably going to shift further north. We see that happening. It's getting warmer in the north, and it's getting too hot down in the south. And hopefully we do more and more things to mitigate climate change by the way we farm and the way we eat. We can't have I don't think we can have a system where this society is so dependent on animal protein for its future. There's been a number of scientists that have made a lot of predictions in this area. So I think incorporating more plants in the diet, incorporating organic farming and eating methods, these are things I think that help spell for a positive future. We, by our choices, I think have the power to make or destroy the world. We have to wake up. People like that wonderful little Swedish girl.
Greta.
Yeah, she has done. She's done a tremendous job. Yeah, our kids were rooting for her, and some of them were actually attending rallies by her, and it's wonderful to see that they're holding the people, the power brokers, to account. So I really do have a lot of hope for the future. I've tried to guide my children. I've tried to teach by example, by my life choices, and I see that all of our kids are kind of activists, and their kids are our grandchildren. They're becoming activists, and their friends are becoming activists. So I think there is hope. We have to mentor. I think that coming generation. We've got to get out of the way and let them come to the fore. I think that is the future of the organic movement.
Great. Well, Arran Stephens, thank you so much. You have lived a life that marries hope to action. So I think that's a good marriage.
Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you will subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a review on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you found us. A video version of this interview, as well as the full transcript with links related to today's conversation, can be found at realorganic.org/episode 22. Please join us next time for an interview with the hugely influential Arran Stephens, founder of Holistic Management International and the Savory Institute. To find a Real Organic farm near you, visit realorganicproject.org/farms.